I want to see how good the Bambu Labs A1 3D printer actually is for 3D printing Warhammer. So, in the first of my many tests I will be doing, I am going to 3D print a legendary tank from the grim dark universe, and then I'm going to be showing you what is, in my opinion, the best way to 3D print tanks. And not only that, I'm also going to compare it directly to a resin printed version and tell you what I really think about this printer. Because you already know, if you've watched me before, I'm going to be as honest as possible with what I think about this printer. If you haven't watched my channel before, then my name is Sam and I have been 3D printing Warhammer for over 3 years, and I have 3D printed close to 3,000 models in that time. But FDM printers have never come close to resin in my opinion. Will the A1 change my mind? Yes and no, but I'll get into that later. Full disclaimer, Bambu Labs have sent me this 3D printer and the AMS unit free of charge. No money has changed hands, but I am a part of their affiliate scheme, which means I do make some money on sales through my links. Regardless of that, I will aim to be as unbiased as I can, but I've said before that YouTubers getting free things to me feels like there will always be some type of bias. But now is the real test. There are a lot of files out there to print your own lemons from Russ, but I have pretty much already dedicated myself to the dark gods of the makers cult. So I will be using one of their tanks as a very good proxy model for a similar tank in a grim dark universe. I'm going to be using the 0.4mm nozzle that comes as standard with the printer, and I'll be using the high quality detail preset in Bambu Studio, which is 0.12mm layer height. This tank is not optimized for FDM printing, and it actually comes pre-supported for resin printers, which usually means I can just drag, drop and print them. Therefore, this is where the big difference for me comes. But I'm going to use this opportunity to find out the best way to 3D print these tanks, and one of those ways is to pre-build the tank model on my computer before printing. I'm doing this way first because I actually tried to do this exact same video a few months ago with my other FDM printer, and it was an absolute nightmare with all the supports and failures. But pre-building in Microsoft 3D Builder is just a case of double checking on every axis that things are lined up. A big tip I can give you is that you can hover over the picture of the connecting piece on the right hand side of the program, and it will turn it into sort of X-ray like view, which can be really handy for some connections. So the first way of test printing is having the sides separate from the hull and using the ironing function to smooth out the top surfaces of the model. This should help make it look more resin-like. But I've done a lot of research and no prior testing on this, so I'm going into this completely blind. A good thing about the size of the build plate on the A1 is that all the tank parts fit onto one plate easily, and therefore it only took 15 hours to fully print a tank. Everything looks great, but there are some really obvious layer lines on the top ends of the turret and cannon. This might be because the tank isn't optimized for FDM printers and it has some angled slopes. But it does give me an opportunity to test out what the best way to clean these up is. But another thing that's jumped out to me is the exposed parts of the inside of the tank tracks have a really weird waffle-like texture to them. I think it's because these sides have these little bolts in them, so the printer had to create mini supports or a raft of some sort. I sat trying to figure out the best way to approach this problem, and one solution I came up with was using the planar cutting function in the Bambu Studio slicer and essentially cutting away the bolts that I don't personally care for to see if I can make the texture look better by being printed directly to the base of the printer, which has a textured PEI plate. I also changed the infill type to lightning to see if it made a big difference to the end result. I do have to say, I like this texture more for the inside of the tracks, and I think it will be easier to smooth out later on, but there is another way of printing this tank that I want to try because it could save me a lot of time for a really big project that I have in mind. But before I could do it, I wanted to check first if this was something that's usually done, and I asked in the private Discord for some help, which you can join by becoming a Patreon or YouTube channel member and get access to possibly the best Discord in this universe by scanning the QR code on screen or clicking the link in the description down below. In the private Discord, I got the confirmation I needed to hear and went ahead and pre-built the main part of the tank with everything connected to each other with the exception of the turret. I want to keep this separate because I want to play around with some settings later on and see if I can get it to print even better. While the tank body was printing, I realized I sort of messed up while pre-building this because one side is slightly off center and more forward than the other side. But sure, no one will know, except of course me and you. 3D printing the tank standing up pre-built worked way better than I thought it would. But the weird patterns are still on the top of the hull, which is kind of annoying, but I might be able to fix that later. And considering this only cost me like $1.50 in materials alone, I think I can overlook some lines. The first turret was printed with a 0.12mm layer height, so to try and fix the layer lines on the turret, I changed the layer height to its lowest 0.08mm setting and tried to use the variable height layer line function to smooth out some of the harshest bits. Comparing the two turrets side by side, I can say with the 0.12mm layer height, it was easier to remove the supports and they left less scarring on the bottom than the 0.08mm. I just used the stock settings for the tree supports from Bambu Studio Slicer. I have printed this same tank on my Resin 3D printer at a 0.03mm layer height, and before cleanup and finishing, it is clear to see that the resin printer looks better straight out of the printer. But the resin printed option costs $7.50 in materials, which is 5 times more than the FDM option. And it also needs its own dedicated area. Does this mean I am going to be only printing my tanks on the A1 from now on? Well, it's not a simple yes or no. I think so far the best way to 3D print tanks on the A1 is with the body pre-assembled and standing upright. But the problem I'm having is that this sculpt has very slight angled slopes on the turret and hull, making it harder for the A1 to print it smoothly, even using the ironing function. To test my theory of the slope problem, I 3D printed a Space Marine tank which appears to be designed or at least split up for FDM printers. Seeing how this was split up made me debate whether or not my previous thinking of printing the tanks pre-built upright is the best way or not. But one thing I can say for sure is that doing it my way means the tanks are on the table faster because the Space Marine tank was split up over 4 plates, and with the same settings as the Lemon tanks, it took well over 24 hours to print. There is still some cleanup needed, but one thing I will say is the default tree supports in Bambu Studios have worked really well for me so far, and they work a lot better than supports I have used on previous FDM printers trying to do the exact same project. Because the Space Marine tank is split into multiple parts, it means that a lot of the details are kept, but it also means that there's a lot more things that need gluing together. I use superglue to glue the parts to each other, and while I did have some shenanigans happen while building it, I'm very impressed with the final result. But I'm even more impressed by the fact that this cost just over $3 roughly in materials. I do have to note, I also appear to not have printed everything needed for the tank, so I will have to revisit this project again in the future. So far, I have been really impressed with the A1, but the only problem that I have with FDM printing models is the layer lines. It's just the nature of the beast when the printers are literally melting plastic layer by layer onto itself. So that's why I want to find out what the best way to get rid of some of these imperfections is. Therefore, I need your help, brother. Please leave your tips for cleanup in the comments down below. I will test out all the different ways and make a separate video to once and for all decide the best way to finish FDM printed Warhammer models. Once I have these cleaned up, I can also find out the best way to paint them, which of course I will share with you. Now, it has to be said, I don't really do reviews on 3D printers, but I will gladly go on record and say this A1 3D printer from Bambu Labs is fantastic. If you've been thinking about 3D printing Warhammer models or just 3D printing in general and don't want to deal with the resin side of it, then I can recommend the A1. However, be warned, with an FDM printer, and especially one with an AMS unit loaded up with different colors, you will be printing out things constantly, which isn't a bad problem to have. With the AMS unit, I've printed out loads of different things with it, so far ranging from functional things for the house like these cable management clips to decorations, coasters, and even bases for my minis. Even if you don't think you will be using different colors, you can load up multiple slots with the same color and effectively have more filament ready to go in case you run out mid-print on the AMS unit. And then your models won't look like this. One really handy feature that I didn't realize it had is that if there is a part of your plate that is failing, you can tell the printer to ignore that part of the print altogether. This saved me from so much wasted filament on this one plate, whereas on a different FDM printer that I had done it before, I had to stop the print and start all over again. I'll leave a link in the description down below, which is an affiliate link that I will earn commission on at no extra cost to you, but honestly, commission incentives aside, if you've been sitting on the fence about getting this printer, just get it. I will also be testing out the 0.2mm nozzle on some Space Marines and other minis in the future, so make sure you're subscribed and have notifications turned on so you can watch that video as well. Leave a like on the video to let me know if this is actually something you would like to see in the future. But if you're also thinking of using resin printers for 3D printing Warhammer, then you should watch this video next, because I rank the best 3D printers I have used in the last 3 years. As always, I want to give a huge thanks to all of my Patreons and channel members, because without your support, none of this would be possible. It means a lot to me, and I hope you know I'm grateful for it. I'll see you all in the Discord.